In the late evening of June 4th, 1989, the train 211, operating between Novosibirsk and Adler, makes an unscheduled stopover at Asha station. One of the passengers, a 5-year-old boy, felt sick. An ambulance brigade boards the train and suggests to his mother that they disembark. But she refuses to stay overnight in an unfamiliar city. She's unaware that this suggestion could have saved their lives. The boy receives a shot, and half an hour later, the train is cleared for departure. By that time, 211 is almost 2 hours in late due to previous delays. At the same time, train 212, which is operating in the opposite direction, passes Ulu-Telak train station with an overall delay of 1.5 hours. Now, two trains are heading towards each other to meet in a valley called
the Serpent's Lair,
situated in the middle of Ulu-Telak-Asha railway sector. While their ways converge, an inevitable accident, destined to become the largest technogenic railway crash in history, is looming. Let's have a closer look on who is traveling in the carriages. Novosibirsk at the time is a huge industrial center with population over 1 million inhabitants. Situated in western Siberia, it's known for its harsh continental climate, with climatic winters lasting over 120 days and notoriously poor ecology. To support workers and their families, especially miners, so-called union vouchers were widely distributed each year. These vouchers allowed families to travel to Caucasus resorts for a fraction of its real cost. For the Siberian inhabitants, the most popular destinations were Crimea, western coast of the Black Sea, and mineral water sanatoriums of the North Caucasus. The destination of 211, Adler Station, is better known as the city of Sochi, one of the largest Soviet health resorts, accommodating millions of tourists each year. Needless to say that at the beginning of the June vacation period overlapped with summer school holidays. Thus, the train 211 was full of families with children and high school students sent to the summer camps. Speaking about the train 212, there were not many differences. Most of the passengers were returning homes after vacation. It's 11 p.m., 4 minutes before two trains will have met. In combined, they are carrying 1,284 passengers, with a substantial part of miners among them, served by 86 crew members, including carriage attendants and locomotive brigades. Not only both trains are fully occupied, but according to some sources, they are even slightly overbooked. At 11:14 p.m., when the driver of 212 Viktor Bezverhi enters the curve in the Serpent's Lair, he notices a strange smog shrouding the train. As the lights of the oncoming 211 become brighter and brighter, a sinister smoke densifies and envelopes both trains. Some of the passengers would then recall that when 211 was passing by, they could barely see it due to a dense whitish mist, and heard a strange buzz dissimilar to anything they had heard before. As the trains are hurtling by on parallel tracks, a man is about to finish his cigarette in a gangway between two carriages. He is making his last inhale and throwing the stub into the slit in the floor. A blinding blast of such enormous power that seismic stations across the USSR immediately alarm an earthquake in the far region shakes the whole district. In Asha, which is 10 kilometers away, windows are shattered. Locals of the nearby villages of Kazakh and Krasny Vashod contemplate a pillar of fire with a mushroom-like top rising in the sky just kilometers away. Pieces of burning debris reach the villages and ignite several fires. People are shocked and aghast, believing that the Third World War has just begun. At the same time, in the epicenter, the carriages that were not instantly evaporated by the blast are quickly turning into burning traps. Decorative plastic panels, linoleum, and artificial leather combust, releasing highly toxic fumes. Just several inhales are enough to seal the fate of the passenger, even if he would manage to escape the carriage. Those who are thrown on the ground through windows and torn apart roofs have in fact better chance to survive. Along with those who are lucky to leave the carriages instantly, they are now trying to hide in the woods nearby. However, there would be no salvation, as the wood is also engulfed by the fire. In a state of traumatic shock, the injured and severely burned passengers are wandering along the rails, not realizing what's going on. Only hell of fire screams and the darkness around them. Attempts to find relatives and classmates go in vain, as nothing could be found in the mess of burning metal wreckage and disfigured people covered with a layer of soot and dust. Sergei Muradov, one of the carriage attendants, will later provide a testimony that captures chaotic and bewildering atmosphere of the first minutes after the blast.
I thought that we were under attack and need to proceed to a defense. When I stumbled on a group of soldiers who were traveling in the next carriage, I shouted, "Hey guys, stop! Stop right there! Do you have machine guns in the box?" They were carrying a box with them. They replied, "These are grenades." I told them to open the box and use it against attackers. They looked at me as I was mad and quickly escaped to the woods.
Meanwhile, the driver of 212, Viktor Bezverhy, who passed out immediately after the explosion, regains consciousness. He finds out his locomotive torn apart and burning, and his assistant Sergei Misherikov lying on the floor.
Breathless.
Viktor tries to contact dispatcher at Asha, but all the telegraph lines are destroyed by the flames. Realizing the gargantuan scale of the catastrophe, Viktor decides to proceed towards Asha on foot. He also sustained severe injuries, and as later will be found, suffered burns on 35% of his body. He nearly passes out several times, falling on the ground and almost touching the rails. Little does he know that if it were to happen, he would be instantly killed. This is because the contact electric wire, severed by the explosion, fell precisely on the rails near the wreckage of the train. And by the time several unsuspecting victims of the crash had been already turned into ashes after stepping the rails, as described by the eyewitnesses. When Viktor finally arrives to Asha and reports to the station dispatcher, at first, no one believes him. The gravity of the accident was just inconceivable. However, the head of the shift, Valentina Yurtaeva, decides to send a locomotive to investigate. And when half an hour later, it returns full of injured and burned passengers of 211 and 212, the real scale of the accident begins to emerge. Asha train station brigade commences evacuation with their own forces, adding several platforms to the locomotive, while waiting for fire emergencies to unfold the search and rescue operation. However, it's not until the dawn when the flagrant consequences of the explosion become evident. But with the first rays of the sun, the truth is revealed. The trains are obliterated, with the carriages turned into charred debris, cindered with soil. The surrounding woods, extending over a mile from the epicenter, is utterly decimated, leaving not a single tree standing. The force of the explosion is estimated to be between 10 and 12 megatons of TNT. To compare, the little boy atomic bomb had a yield of approximately 15 megatons. For both rescue services and investigators, it's immediately evident that not only the death toll on this tragedy is staggering, but that the substantial part of victims wouldn't be identified or even discovered. Local medical services in Ufa and Chelyabinsk are overwhelmed by a quantity of grave patients on their hands. The consequences are so severe that even Soviet government, which often attempted to hide and downplay the outcomes of technogenic accidents on its soil, is compelled to admit the gravity of the situation. At this point, international organizations from Germany, UK and US intervene to help. Specialists of American National Kidney Foundation arrive in Moscow. Philanthropist Arman Hammer provides locking equipment on his own expenses. Germany sends over 29 tons of medicines unavailable in Soviet Russia. Those who suffered the most and couldn't be properly treated even in Moscow, are evacuated to burn units in Great Britain. Everyone is there to help Soviets to cope with the outcome of this tragedy. To give you an idea of how this catastrophe shook the very essence of the USSR, President Mikhail Gorbachev arrived in Ufa the day following the accident. The same Mikhail Gorbachev who tried to veil Chernobyl outcomes just 3 years before, the same Mikhail Gorbachev who refrained from visiting Ukraine at the time and tried to distance himself as much as possible from the consequences of Chernobyl tragedy. But this time he felt that it was another story. And now the only question is lingering in the air. How could this happen? Could it be an unforeseen deployment of weapon of mass destruction, or a tragic outcome of military exercises where something went very wrong, or an act of terrorism? Revenge of Afghanistan that had been suffering from Soviet intervention for 10 years. These are the initial hypotheses put into work by investigators. However, even before Gorbachev's aircraft touched the ground in Ufa, the true cause of the accident is uncovered, and this unpleasant truth turns to be shockingly
mundane.
You are watching the Northern Philosopher Project. Documentaries and video essays on sensitive and controversial topics. The Northern Philosopher is a place where tragic and sinister events meet dark personalities to give birth to narratives that shape our reality.
If you dare to dive into the darkest corners of our past, feel free to join me.
To support the project, please hit the like button and consider sharing this video through your social media. Don't forget to subscribe the channel and hit notification bell to stay updated. And if you find that this content worth a penny, you may support the Northern Philosopher via Patreon, where you will gain an early access to uncensored versions of videos and many other benefits.
Thank you for your precious time. I love you all. Sincerely yours, the Northern Philosopher. To comprehend the cause of this catastrophe, we need to rewind a bit and have a closer look at Soviet's economy. In the middle of 1980s, the USSR is a country that imports everything. Literally everything, including even essential goods such as wheat. It also has tons of political liabilities across the globe. All those red dictators in Romania, Yugoslavia, Egypt, Cuba, etc. were extremely expensive to provide. They demanded a lot, and demanded in dollars, not rubles. The sole viable source of currency for the USSR is crude oil and gas exports. But after the oil glut, which led to the abrupt fall of the oil price by 70%, the Soviet Union is put on the verge of collapse. Its economy starts crumbling. The only way out is to try to buy some time, increasing oil production and export. New oil and gas pipelines were built in a rush. One of the mega projects of the time was Western Siberia Ural-Volga oil pipeline, operating since late 1985. I don't want to delve into the overall construction culture in Soviet Union. Long story short, it was poor. People often prioritized writing a good report than ensuring the quality of work. It was not uncommon for the projects to be launched prematurely, and not because they are well prepared and ready to be launched, but because it's 1st of May, International Workers' Day, it's 7th of November, anniversary of Socialist Revolution. People sought to make favorable impressions, because their careers depended on it. This small culture was indoctrinated in USSR for decades. Mixed with the lack of modern technologies and disregard of consistent technological standards, it was just a matter of time when everything will begin to crumble. And the case of Western Siberia Ural-Volga oil pipeline was not an exception. Rather, it was a case study in failure. It was built in a rush, with severe violations of even basic construction norms. For instance, the pipe segments were offloaded from delivery platforms, not with a construction crane, as it should be, but using simple bulldozers. You can imagine the consequences of such handling. To make matters worse, when it became more profitable to export gas rather than oil, the oil pipeline was repurposed for gas transportation. You know, for real, I'm not kidding. And the worst thing, that this catastrophe could have been easily prevented. For over 3 weeks before the explosion, locals from nearby villages and train drivers passing by the Serpent's lair reported a strong smell of gas. Reaction of the authorities? There is no threat. Even if there is a leak, the concentration of the gas in the atmosphere is negligible. And here we are on June 4th, 1989, at a gas distribution station, serving the segment of the pipeline passing by the Serpent's lair. At 10:30 p.m., 44 minutes before the explosion, an engineer notices a rapid fall of the pressure in the line. The only reason for this is a major leak somewhere on the pipeline. His decision regarding this issue is to increase the supply in order to restore the pressure. I'm speechless. But why do you think this engineer made such decision in the first place? Or even another question, do you really believe that this engineer was in charge of making such decisions? I cannot prove this, but I'm 100% sure that he was specifically instructed to maintain the pressure in the export pipeline no matter what. And he just blindly obeyed, because blind obedience was a part of Soviet working mall culture. Everything else is just a tragic coincidence. Serpent's Lair is a cloistered valley constrained by the hills from one side. The absence of the wind at night, coupled with a rapid drop of the ground temperature, created perfect conditions for the gas to accumulate. Moreover, those trains were not meant to meet there. Neither of them was supposed to be there in the first place. Yet a synchronized delay, a leak, and an accidental spark. Well, even if it may appear as a destiny, it was a mere consequence. Over the next week, a kilometer-long wall of stands covered with photos will be built in Ufa. Those who didn't find their relatives in hospitals and morgues are now gathering here. But these are not photos of victims on the stands. These are photos of
fragments.
Sometimes just pieces of clothing with some distinct color or print. Several brigades of ambulance are on 24-hour shift near the stands.
It was probably over 86 degrees. People were lining in front of these kilometer-long stands. Some were passing out, then given a shot by the ambulance. Rendered conscious, people were coming back and kept looking through photographs. That's how we had found our son.
But for some people, there wouldn't be even elementary closure, such as a piece of tissue belonging to their beloved. They will later travel to the place of the accident for a handful of soil. Would they be satisfied with the grievances and condolences of Mr. Gorbachev?
I need to mention that these accidents are following us. Most of it are due to misconduct and bad organization. I cannot make a solid statement right away, but it seems like that this time it was again some sort of violations of this complicated equipment exploitation. But it's up to the upcoming investigation to establish solidly. That's why investigation committee and KGB are engaged, and we need to demand for accountability from those responsible. We cannot let such accidents just pass by. There should be order and discipline. Perestroika cannot be accomplished without it.
Well, at least right conclusions were made. Proper investigation was conducted, and those who were truly accountable were prosecuted and sentenced through open and public process. somewhere in a parallel universe. Of course, no one was actually punished. The investigation was as muddy as possible and lasted for more than 6 years. In the end, several scapegoats were presented to the stunned public. The head of the construction works, the foreman who signed the documents, and several workers. They were all sentenced to a laughable 2 years in prison and granted amnesty almost immediately. Justice was served for 575 deceased and 623 injured who endured the hell on the earth. Justice was served for them and their families. This is an awful price the nation pays for complacency, incompetence, and lies, for blind obedience, for see no evil, hear no evil behavior, for cowardice, and the absence of civic responsibility. This tragedy could have been prevented at any point, but there was no one to prevent it. Nobody cared. And this is exactly why the whole country, the USSR, collapsed just several years later. This one was tough. Thank you for staying with me. I'm the Northern Philosopher. Have a good one.